Secretary Dominic Raab is in Doha today for talks with Qatari leaders on how to help British nationals and Afghans trying to leave Afghanistan. Well, the talks involve trying to persuade the Taliban to reopen the airport in Kabul, which has been effectively closed since the US withdrew all its final forces on Monday night. Now, Qatar is a key player, having allowed the Taliban to have a political office in the country for 8 years.
Now, Dominic Raab's Middle East tour came hours after he was grilled by MPs on the Common Affairs Select Committee about the UK's withdrawal. The Foreign Secretary was forced to admit that the UK government is unable to say how many Afghans are eligible to come to Britain and how many actually remain in Afghanistan. Well, joining us now is Afzal Amin, who is a former British Army soldier who served in Afghanistan. Very good afternoon to you. I'm sure you listened to what Dominic Raab had to say in the Commons yesterday. What was your reaction to that, and indeed to his efforts today to try and work with countries in the region, essentially, to get more people out?
Well, first of all, I'd like to just acknowledge something which Rosie just mentioned about Qatar and the role Qatar has played. It's quite extraordinary over the last 8 years, this role that Qatar has played to bring this war to an end. And I think there's probably two big things to point out. The first one is the incredible generosity of the Qatar government hosting the Taliban and everyone negotiating with them for this period of time. And then the role that the Qatar military has played in facilitating the evacuation of people from Kabul airport back to Doha and then onwards to wherever they needed to go. And I think that comes largely from the fact that the Emir of Qatar is a Sandhurst graduate, a highly responsible actor in the region. And over the many years now, we've seen Qatar under quite some pressure from its neighbours, but still standing up for itself and still being a part of the international community and behaving admirably, in fact. And I just wanted to acknowledge that. In terms of Dominic Raab's appearance yesterday at the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, I mean, of course, there's going to be things to point out in hindsight in a fast-moving, dynamic, difficult situation. And Labour tried to make a very big sort of push into the things that they could find which went wrong. But we must go back slightly, and I think Labour need to behave slightly more humbly, because it was in 2001 that a Labour cabinet decided that military action in Afghanistan was necessary. And then in 2006 decided that, 2004 decided that military boots on the ground were necessary, and we went into Helmand. And so the years that followed after that, in terms of what we were meant to do there, largely ignored the military advice received in 2004 from the initial army reconnaissance teams that there was no terrorism threat in Helmand. And yet the Labour government, the Labour cabinet decided we were still going to go there and to undertake what sorts of work: counter-narcotics, education reform, healthcare, particularly women's access to healthcare and education, water reform, public access to justice, security sector reform, and so on. And against all of those measures, we document under-resourcing from Labour, a failure to lead politically from Labour, and then a complete abandonment of the Afghan campaign because of the unnecessary war in attacking Iraq. So I think Labour should start off every time they speak of Afghanistan with an apology to all the mistakes that they've made, which have been monumental. And I've spoken before in your programme about every one of us from the military community. Every day we are hit on an emotional and psychological level with this war. So today is September the 2nd. In 2006, 14 British Armed Forces personnel were killed when their aircraft crashed in southern Afghanistan. From the Army, from the Navy, and from the Air Force. It was an extraordinary loss of life at that time, and every one of us remains affected every single day when we are reminded of these events. And Labour yesterday, I thought, were just appalling in their lack of acknowledgement of their own mistakes. It's very, very disappointing.
Let's just talk about the situation that Dominic Raab will, inherit when he arrives. What are his immediate priorities? Things like getting the Taliban to reopen the airport. What does he need to engineer, and how possible do you think it's going to be able to do that in a very timely fashion?
Well, I think he's done absolutely the right thing and gone to Qatar to meet with a whole range of actors. I think his next stop is going to be in Pakistan. which of course the nearest international airport to Kabul is the airport in Islamabad. So there will be a lot of issues there on health and safety, on fire trucks, on access to all manner of other safety-related equipment which is needed for an international airport. And then, of course, the technical teams arrived yesterday from Qatar and Turkey to provide all the other services that an airport needs in terms of securely receiving people, processing them onto aircraft, safely managing those aircraft as they arrive and depart. I would hope Britain has a role to play in that. I suspect we don't need to. In Qatar Airways and Turkish Airlines are probably two top performing airlines in the world, so I think they've got enough of an expertise there. The main thing Britain can do is to look at the geostrategic picture of what happens next, because there are actors in the region, Iran, China, Russia, who all need to be involved in securing Afghanistan. And I hope that the Foreign Secretary will visit those capitals too and talk to those to his counterparts in those countries, and particularly the military chiefs in those countries, because we can't have now in Afghanistan that is just abandoned to its own devices. We've got to, in my view, we've got to decisively engage for the 40 million Afghans. And this is where I think our democracy is best served by having a governing party that's effectively opposed by an opposition that's organised and informed. At the moment, Labour's failure to properly understand what's going on and to offer any ideas is a disservice to our democracy. I want to hear from Labour. What are your plans? For example, we have a huge issue at the moment with the Panjshir Valley resistance. Now, the people in Panjshir, it's well documented, are amongst the bravest and most sort of upright Afghans in terms of their resistance to foreign occupation. And now they find themselves on the wrong end of this change, where the people from the opposition from the Taliban are now in charge of the country, and they find themselves largely abandoned by the international community. Is Labour's policy to ask Ahmed Massoud, himself British educated, to wind down the tension and to come to a political settlement? Or is Labour's policy that we should support him in fomenting a civil war in opposing the Taliban? Which one is it?
We have reached out to the Labour Party to ask them some of those questions. At this point, a spokesperson isn't available. Thank you very much for speaking to us, Afzal Amin, former British Army officer, speaking to us about the ongoing developments, the crisis in Afghanistan, and Dominic Raab's trip to Qatar to try and negotiate access for people still left in Afghanistan to be able to leave the country.
Yeah, indeed. And we must say, he said this morning that at the moment the UK government have not got to the stage where they are going to recognise, essentially, the Taliban government. That's clearly one of the carrots, you could put it, that they have got in their armour in terms of trying to, in these negotiations with the Taliban, work out just how much they can persuade them to do certain things. And clearly international aid and recognition of them as the official government of Afghanistan is one of the negotiating tactics that we'll see play out in the weeks to come.